The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. A man in the crowd said to Jesus, "Master, tell my brother to give me a share of our inheritance." "My friend," he replied, "who appointed me your judge or the arbitrator of your claims?" Then he said to them, "Watch and be on your guard against avarice of any kind. For man's life is not made secure by what he owns, even when he owns more than he needs." Then he told them a parable. There was once a rich man who, having had a good harvest from his land, thought to himself, "What am I to do? I have not enough room to store my crops." And then he said, "This is what I will do. I will pull down my barns and build bigger ones, and store all my grains and my goods in them. And I will say to my soul, 'My soul, you have plenty of good things laid by for many years to come. Take things easy, eat, drink, have a good time.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this very night the demand will be made for your soul. And this hoard of yours, whose will it be then?' So it is when a man stores up treasure for himself in place of making himself rich in the sight of God." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I'm not too sure, but just to be careful, I think you should just to be careful. I think you should buckle up, just to be careful. I'm reading this text that we have for this weekend in the context of emancipation, which is the celebration that we are celebrating as a nation. One of the very significant milestones in the history of Trinidad and Tobago, that before 1834, the African was seen as property and treated in the most terrible of all ways. And what was driving the slave trade? What was driving it? Greed. That was what was driving it. That money could be made, and that money could be made in superabundance, and the fact that we had to exploit a people, well, that was just, casualty. That was just collateral damage. And the thinking behind slavery, that you can subjugate a people for the sake of profit for another people, we have to see that you can't turn a person into a commodity. You can't turn a person into a commodity, which is, in its most extreme form, what happened in the African slave trade, and what happened in slavery in these beautiful islands that were known as the British West Indies. When the law was passed finally, after many years, the law coming to Parliament, many years from the 1700s, the law kept coming, and it kept getting turned down. And why was it turned down? Why was it difficult for the British Parliament to see that this thing was a heinous crime against a people? Why was it so difficult to see? Well, it was difficult to see because a lot of the MPs who had to vote on the law were benefiting directly from the wealth generated from the British slave trade and from British sugar. And so their greed determined their morality. And rather than doing the right thing, what was happening was that they were doing the convenient thing to keep their patrons, the sugar barons, happy with them, rather than doing the right thing to keep themselves under God and doing what God wanted them to do. Everybody with me on this? So we have this wonderful example in the 1700s and early 1800s where very sophisticated, learned men who went to church every Sunday, who would have considered themselves God-fearing, who would have been outstanding in society, who would have been nobles in their society, elders to be looked up at, that rather than seeing past the challenge of the morality of sugar, they saw only the economics of sugar. And therefore, they kept a system going that enslaved human beings, and they kept it going even when the case was made to Parliament over, and every year Wilberforce brought a bill to Parliament. Every year it was rejected for about 30 years. Every year he just kept bringing it. And every year they rejected it. And the only reason was because money was more important than conscience. You hear me? You sure you hearing me? Because so far I only talking about them people back then. So far. So far. The reading we have today, where the poor guy who had experienced an injustice from his brother comes to Jesus asking for help to make what was wrong right, says, "Tell my brother to give me a share of our inheritance." And Jesus simply buffed him. "Who appointed me your judge or arbiter of your claims?" Who? And then goes on to give a teaching. Then he said to them, "Watch and be on your guard against avarice of every kind. For a man's life is not made secure by what he owns, even when he has more than he needs." And the word that is translated here as avarice is really insatiable greed. That's probably the best translation. So it's not speaking about working hard for what you need for yourself and your family. Not talking about that. It's talking about insatiable greed, that even after you have what you need for a generation, you're looking for 2, 4, 10 generations, and you're willing to do that regardless of what the consequences are. Insatiable greed is the real translation. So your life will not be made secure by what you own, even when you own more than enough. Even when you went crazy and you have enough wealth for 25 generations, your life is still not made secure. And the point that Jesus is making here is a very vital point for us in Trinidad and Tobago in 2022 to start contemplating what makes our life secure. What makes our life secure? You see, in another passage, Jesus says you can't have two masters. You can't serve both God and money. You can't have two masters. You're going to love one and you're going to start hating the next one. And what makes our life secure? Is it our trust in God? Or is it our trust in our bank account? Is it putting our faith in God? Or is it putting our faith in our portfolio? What makes our life secure? And that question is a haunting question. Read that question back in the 17 and 1800s in Britain with the parliamentarians who refused to do the right thing. Because their pockets were being filled, they refused to do the thing of conscience. Because of a comfortable life, they refused to listen to the voice of God. Going to church every week, attending Mass and attending all of the religious services and doing all the things that civilized people do, but at the very core of their being, they were making a decision for an inhumanity, and they knew that what they were doing was wrong. Or they worked hard to distort their conscience and convince themselves that what was wrong was really right. And they convinced themselves what was wrong was really right because it was good for their pocket, it was good for their family, it was good for their community, it was good for the business in the towns in which they were, especially if you had to be if you were in one of the port towns where you were benefiting directly from the African slave trade. Are you hearing me? Jesus then goes and he gives them a parable. Huh? There was once a rich man who, having had a good harvest, thought to himself, what am I to do? I have enough now stored up for many, many years to come. And he said, you know what? I know what I'm going to do, you know. I'm going to pull down these barns. I'm going to build bigger ones. I'm going to store all my grain and all my goods. And then I'll say to my soul, you have plenty good things laid by for many, many years to come. Take it easy. Eat, drink, have a good time. But God said to him, God said to him, I still ain't hear, you know. God said to him, fool. Gosh, what a thing. Imagine when God said to you, fool. But listen now, run. Yeah? Run, skedaddle out of that place one time. Fool. This very night the demand will be made for your soul. And this hoard of yours, whose will it be then? So it is when you store up treasure for yourself in place of making yourself rich in the sight of God. Brothers and sisters, the first thing in this text that is evident is that each one of us are going to meet God one day, and we're going to give an account for our life. That's the first thing. One day, you're going to meet God, and you better start praying from now that when God look at you, he ain't say the F word. I talking about fool. He don't tell you fool. Because there are many times where we live the practice of religion on the external of our life, but in the inner spaces of our soul and our heart, we are not giving ourselves over to God. This man was a devout man. He was a Jew. He would have had everything. But look at the problem the guy has. The first problem is that when he has more than enough, rather than recognizing that he is only a steward of everything he has, and everything actually belongs to God, and rather than understanding that everything in his life has to come under the obedience of God, under the patronage of God, under the will of God, under the norms and the laws of God, rather than recognizing that he thinks he is the arbitrator of his own life and the end of his own existence. And he's placed himself where God and God alone should be. Now this is concupiscence, which comes straight from Genesis. And what did Eve see? She saw the fruit as pleasing to the eye, lust of the eye, good for food, lust of the body, and good for wisdom, pride of life. This man is filled with lust of the eye and lust of the body. And he distorts his relationship with God and neighbor and turns it into what is good for him and for him alone. This is the ultimate in selfishness, in individualism, in thinking that you can find salvation by securing yourself. And to that philosophy, God says, fool, fool, fool. God says fool. And that's why in our first reading, vanity of vanities, the preacher says, all is vanity and a chasing after the sun, because foolishness and foolishness, all is foolishness if you're not putting your life ordered by God and God first. You know, in 1970, we had the Black Power Revolution. And I always have seen that as the extension of emancipation. Because it was the first time the society asked the most fundamental question. All these people living here, why are we treating some as better human beings and some as lesser human beings when all these people are living here and all these people are supposed to be equal? And the Black Power Revolution asked the question that 1934, 1938 set in motion. And after the revolution, and the question was asked, many things changed in the society. But as often happens when a person or a society has a traumatic experience, rather than going to the soul and going to the truth and going deep into the destiny for our nation and where we needed to go, by understanding that if God created everyone must be treated equally, we splintered. And by the 1980s and 1990s, we splintered into a kind of greed that we now see in our nation as covetousness and really a greed that drives every sector of our society. And I believe both 1970 and then 1990 set that in motion. Because we didn't sit as a nation and face what was most fundamental. That there is a wound in this nation that has not yet been healed. There are a people who have been wronged, who have never been apologized to. There is an exploitation that has taken place that has never been completely healed. And because we have not sat as a nation and faced the truth of our history and do the soul work that is required of us as a people, what we have done is we've gone for money to solve the problem. And by going for money to solve the problem, we have put ourselves in a place of corruption like we have never seen before. People have been so corrupt, they have enough for 10 generations to live. And it still ain't enough. They're still going for more. That's this parable, you know. But brothers and sisters, that is every single one of us who belong to this beloved Trinidad and Tobago. We cannot solve the problems of our nation by money. The good doctor said money is not the problem. Well, he lied. Because right now money is the problem. And it's not that we don't have enough, you know. We have more than enough money to solve every problem that Trinidad has. More than enough money. But the problem is insatiable greed of those who should lay down their lives for the sake of the development of this nation, have been more interested in amassing wealth to ourselves than to ensuring the growth, development, and the truth of every human being so that our national anthem will be true. Every creed and race, find an equal place. And because we have made money into our God, we've created a nation where we believe our money will save us. Well, how much you're paying for security today as opposed to 1970? How much you're paying? In 1970, nobody had burglar proofing on the house, and nobody had alarm systems, and a bad dog was all you needed, and life was all right. Today we have. You see, once you make money your highest good, security becomes your biggest problem. Because once money becomes the highest good, the sufferer, those on the fringe of society, start to see the difference between their life and your life. and my life and everybody else's life. And there we have a problem. Our reading today touches, I believe, one of the very deep wounds of Trinidad and Tobago. One of our deep, deep wounds. And it is a spiritual wound. In its essence, it is a spiritual wound. Everyone has tried to fix the problem. And it has only escalated over the last 15, 20 years. It can't be fixed at the level of consciousness that we have been using to address the problem. It can only be fixed if we go to another level of consciousness. I am because we are. And until we recognize that I am fundamentally connected to every citizen in this beautiful, beloved Trinidad and Tobago, and therefore everything I have is not about me, mine, and my, it is really about God and his people, and I am only a steward holding tenuously what God has entrusted into my hands, not for myself and my family, but for every one of God's children in Trinidad and Tobago. And until we are willing to shift from this I-ness that we have so bought into, to the sense of a community of people that are all God's children, we're not going to be able to find emancipation. I think we're more enslaved today than we have been in the 60s and 70s when I was growing up. And I think that enslavement today is more so obscene. When you look at the nudity and all that is happening with the fetes and the carnivals, etc., etc., when you look at all of that, that is a symptom, is not the cause, that is a symptom of a soul gone really, really wrong. And the soul of this nation has gone really wrong. Each of us have to do something to move this thing forward. We can't keep doing it as we have been doing it, because brothers and sisters, look at where we are heading. It is not working. It's not working. We are heading into 1970, 1990. We're heading into an explosion in this country if we don't recognize that what I have is about us. And unless we as a people move from this covetousness that we have so bought into to a sense of doing what we need for the sake of each other, we're going to regret what happens in our beautiful country. And we're already regretting it. Each one of us can make a difference. Every one of us can make a difference. Let's start by recognizing everything I have really belongs to God, and I am only a steward. And as a steward, I have a responsibility for my brother and my sister. Am I my brother's keeper? The first question in Genesis. Am I my brother's keeper? And the answer to that is yes. You are. You are. And therefore, if everybody helps one person in this country will be a fantastic place. If everybody who can reaches out to one another, this country would be brilliant. It would be brilliant. It would be a paradise again. If we're going to celebrate emancipation, we have to recognize the mental slavery that we have taken onto ourselves by this what the alcoholics will call stinking thinking about greed. And we also have to recognize the other major threats that are coming our way. That we have to start asking ourselves, what do we really believe that God is God? And if we believe that, brothers and sisters, there needs to be a conversion in each one of our hearts. Amen.